Good morning, May 19th, and we're actually getting geared up for our first real ride of the year. And it's 7 o'clock in the morning, and I only have one thing left to do. Get rid of these rims and put on my real tires, because I don't know who thinks that that is a dual sport tire. And this is actually a sport touring tire, so we'd better get this bike ready because I'm meeting the boys in an hour. Well, the wheels are on. It took me about 20 minutes because I'm moving a little slow this morning. But we've got brand new 606 in back and a brand new 606 in front. And everything else is ready to rumble, so let's get dressed. First ride of the year, and there you see Joe with his GoPro on. Chris was getting suited up. He'd be riding his HP2.
You have tire pressures? I think mine are in the 20s.
We had a quick estimate of what our tire pressures were, and then it was time to suit up.
Just check it.
Yeah, Joe's pressure seemed good.
Got your spot. GPS.
Chris had his $50 rear tire on.
I think that's like a one-day tire.
Joe had put on some fork protectors.
It's supposed to cover this part.
He put them on wrong. He didn't put them on the slider. He put them on the forked leg.
You just like the foreskin look? You need the long ones, though.
So after our intensive pre-ride inspection, we decided to head down Highway 125 outside of Montreal and head in the direction of the Washout forest. You'll notice here I've got a small 60 series Garmin GPS.
Good.
I thought I fixed my 276, but it still wasn't working right. So I was going to try and use this little 60 for the first time.
Alright, so are you boys ready, Freddie? Oh, so those of us with ABS will have to stop and turn it off at some point.
The first ride of the year always seems to be the one that takes the most preparation. All of your gear is scattered all over the house. All of your tools aren't together in one spot. So it takes a little bit of time on these first rides to always get all of your equipment together. And then all the rest of the rides for the remainder of the season are just so much easier. All your stuff is hanging in one spot. Your tool bags are packed. You've hopefully replaced all the patch repair stuff. Put a new tube in your tool bag so that the next ride, instead of having to do an hour or so of prep the night before and run around and trying to find your missing gloves, for the next ride, all you've got to do is walk downstairs a few minutes before you want to be out the door, get your gear up, fill your Camelback with water, and you're off. The exception to that might be Chris, because if you have no intention of bringing any food or tools or inner tubes or an air pump or anything like that, maybe in Chris's case it doesn't really take any longer to get ready for the first ride than any other ride. We continued down Highway 125. Here on the left we're coming up to the area where we shot our angry man in a housecoat video, and you can see there was a trail there. And right along here, along 125, just before you get near the town of Chertsey, you'll start to notice that there are all these ATV trails that run parallel to the highway. Here on the left, you'll see another glimpse of a trail that's paralleling the highway. So at this point, I decided to take the next one I could see and get off the pavement. One of the very first rides that Chris and I ever did was an early spring ride in the Washout forest, and there's a video of that. It's one of our earliest videos where we got stuck in the snow and did 20 or 30 kilometers in about 8 hours. I can't remember exactly what it was, but that was quite interesting. And all of these trails here are really optimized for ATVs. Some of them you need a trail pass for, others you don't. There was no sign posted here, so we jumped on. But I was pretty sure we needed a pass for this area anyways. And you'll notice with this trail, if you ever take it, that it constantly changes from one side of the highway to the other, so you're always popping across the highway to get to the next leg of the trail. This is what I would call a groomed trail because it's maintained. And depending on the time of year, sometimes it can be in really good shape. They also don't want you going on these trails too early because if the ground is really soft and guys get out there and get stuck and start tearing it up, it can do a huge amount of damage. And then when it does dry up, you've got these incredible ruts and grooves that are going to take a lot of effort to get rid of. The people who ride these ATV trails, from what I can see, they don't seem super interested in it being incredibly challenging. They kind of like to cruise down these trails. They don't go very fast. A lot of the times they have a passenger on the back and it's a little sightseeing convoy. So they're very concerned with these trails being well groomed because they're not interested in coming up to a lot of places where they're not sure they're going to be able to make it, or they're going to get stuck and they're going to have to winch. And some of the ATV guys seem to get into that stuff, but the club members from the guys we've met along the trail seem more interested in just going for more of a Sunday cruise. What's nice for us as guys riding pretty big, heavy off-road bikes is that a hill climb that might be a joke for a guy with four-wheel drive and locking differentials can be interesting for a guy on a big German dual sport. So these trail networks, which several groups have lobbied to get these trails open to us, because the ATV clubs really don't want guys on motocross bikes, ripping down, because like I said, these guys don't go very fast, and when they get passed by a kid on a 252 strokes throwing rocks at 80 miles an hour, they don't like it. So a lot of the groups like Moto Trail Aventure and the Fédération Québécoise des Motos Hors Route have worked with some of these clubs so that we can actually buy a trail pass and we're allowed on. And because our bikes are street legal, quiet exhausts, and we don't fly down here like a motocross bike, more and more of these clubs have been signing on to that. In this area of Quebec, the trails are rocky. So if you don't enjoy rocks, this is probably not going to be the trail network for you. Here you can see this is not a super bad section, but it gets a little mucky and it's bumpy. There were some decent hill climbs on this section of trail. And the only thing here that would really jam you up would be choosing a poor line. If you hit one of those loose rocks and you're going too slow, you might fall, or you might come to a dead stop or spin a wheel, and then you might get stuck. But if you keep your speed up and gather a little bit of momentum, you're going to make it to the top. Decided to stop and wave Chris by. It's odd to think back to 2010 when Chris sent me that first email asking me if I wanted to go riding. Makes me wonder if I had said no, that I was busy that day, or I hadn't wanted to invest in a set of knobbies. how things would have turned out differently. Here you can see this was a decent little climb. I had ridden this trail once before with Jason a while back, so some of it seemed familiar, but it was also quite apparent that the clubs or whoever was maintaining this trail had done a lot of improvements to it and done a lot of work. Some of these sections they'd obviously brought in backfill material, and you can see this wasn't a trail that just evolved. Equipment had been brought in here to excavate things. Here you can see obviously they dug this out to make it flatter, and they brought in some gravel fill. The one section I really remember from doing it before was this section here where they brought in these kind of fist-sized rocks. And this was a situation where going slow was definitely not the way to go. You had this strange sensation in the handlebars like the bike was going to wash out. But as long as you stood up and didn't try to micromanage, the bike would get you through it. We came to another one of the spots where you've got to cross the highway and the trail would continue on the other side. Here it was interesting because the trail actually continued between the two highways. So we had the north and southbound lanes, and the trail was actually going down the center median. And these trails were all marked with signage, so we were pretty sure this was legit and we weren't going to run the risk of getting in trouble with the local constabulary. Eventually, the trail actually took us across the highway again back to the same side we had started on. A lot of these communities are very positive towards all-terrain vehicles and snowmobiles because it's a big source of revenue. In the winter, when the cottage country summer lake people are all gone, a big revenue stream for these communities is snowmobiles. And during the rest of the year, it is the guys on ATVs. So a lot of these municipalities have actually passed legislation where snowmobiles and ATVs, even though they're not street legal, fully licensed and plated vehicles, are allowed into town. And they can also drive along the shoulder in areas where there's no trail system. What's odd is, the motorcycles make up such a small minority compared to ATVs, for example, that a lot of these communities and a lot of these trail networks will specifically be marked no motorcycles. And that's where groups like Moto Trail Aventure and the FQHMR are real handy. Well worth you buying that sticker and giving them the few dollars they want for them to do their job. And I know over the past few years, literally thousands of kilometers of trails have been opened through their lobbying efforts. So in Quebec, those are the guys that you should be supporting, and I know there's groups in Ontario, and I imagine there's groups in all the provinces doing their stuff. So certainly, if you want to have the right to complain about not having access to trails, you've got to support the guys out there who are trying to get the trails opened. Up ahead I could see Chris was stopped.
I guess we're going there. Huh?
That's when Chris pointed out the sign that seemed to indicate we needed a pass to ride these trails. And of course, I guess because we'd gotten on kind of in the middle of nowhere, we hadn't seen any signs. So as we rolled up to this entrance, we could also see there was another sign, and it seemed to be a different club. I saw a guy in his yard with an ATV, so I figured I'd go over and ask him if he knew where we could buy the trail pass. I know you can buy them online. but we decided to see if we could buy them locally. In the end, we decided to just stay off the marked trails for today. We were all planning on buying the pass anyways, but instead of trying to drive around and find a place that had them, and you had to have the one specifically for motorcycle, we couldn't just go buy the one that the ATV guys would use. So we knew up ahead there was some trails that required no pass, so we decided to just jump on the slab and get there. One thing I was quickly finding out was that this little Garmin 60 series was not working for me. The screen was just way too small, and I wear glasses for distance, and if something's really close I have to wear reading glasses, and this combination of this tiny little screen was just not working for me. So if nothing else on this ride, I was learning that I was going to have to get a different GPS.
All of this now is the Washout forest.
These roads were perfect for the kind of bikes we were riding. Over here on the right there was a trail, but it was also posted that you need your trail pass, so we stuck to the left. It must be funny to watch us ride because we're always swinging our heads left, right, looking for a trail entrance. And I spotted this one off on the right, and then nothing was posted, so we headed in. The majority of the time what happens when you see one of these is you head in a couple of 100 meters and then it's a dead end, and it was a road that was pushed in because somebody was doing some logging or something, and that was exactly the case here. Got in a couple of 100 meters and there was a clearing and no exit, so I turned around and headed back to the main road. Every once in a while though you do get lucky, and we found a lot of nice trails by just finding that little crack in the woods and heading in to check it out. The combination of the spring thaw and quite a bit of rain recently had meant there'd been a lot of erosion, and on the right here you can see that kind of crack. That's one of those things that at speed you do not want to run into that groove, which can be 6 inches deep, a foot deep. You get your wheels in there, you can have a pretty exciting moment. So I made a note to myself to kind of keep an eye out. There's some more here on the right, because I don't mind falling. I just don't like falling when I'm going fast. Eventually this little road turned out to be a dead end as well, so we swung around and headed back. Now, hitting a dead end and having to turn around can be a bit of a bummer, but what we've actually found is, now that you've run the road in one direction, when you head back, you're a lot more confident that there aren't any huge surprises, and you can actually have more fun actually on the back track than you did on the first run. As you can see here, not too many big trees happening here, so this area must have been logged in the not too distant past. And I think this, you can see the road. The road is basically made of the same material as the surrounding land, so I don't imagine this soil here is exceptionally great for growing anything. Not to mention lots of rocks, so I don't imagine anybody's going to be farming this land anytime soon. I'm standing up on the pegs here, not just because I want better control, but I can see farther. And on the left, you see some more of those grooves and some in the center. So I'm slowing down here, and our sign is to stick your foot out. You stick your foot out to indicate that there's erosion. And then up ahead, I could see we had some serious erosion. The road up ahead had been totally swept away. And I don't know what all the logs and stuff were if someone had tried to do a makeshift repair. But we certainly weren't going to drive down that road, although there seemed to be a bypass on the left.
Not bad. It's going to be a pain in the ass over there. This is okay.
Once again, our brothers on the ATVs had created some sort of bypass.
Yeah, go down here, just, it's not crazy. Stay to this side. You'll be able to stop here. No, I'll jump, don't worry.
The embankments here are a little steeper than they look, but we've pretty much figured out that if you got 3 guys and some rope, you know, push comes to shove, you can get one of these bikes through pretty much anything.
All right.
And what kills you is really not how steep the obstacle is, it's how long it is. Because if you've got to pull a bike 20 or 30 feet with 3 guys, it's not a big deal.
Big rock. Okay, you're good.
We've been in situations where you have to do it for a kilometer, that's what kills you. So Chris and his $50 tire didn't make it up, and that's when we decided to not kill ourselves, but to just break out the douche rope. For those of you who may not know, the douche rope is a key piece of equipment on all of our rides, and it's called the douche rope because whoever is being pulled on the other end of it is, you guessed it.
Thank God I have friends.
Now, our douche rope is made out of, I believe it's called wire pulling tape, and this is a kind of nylon ribbon that is put through conduit so that you can pull cables through. Apparently you can find this stuff all over the place wherever they're doing cabling. And all we did was put a couple of loops in it and a small carabiner, which makes it very easy to install on a bike without having to get into tying any knots. I think this particular stuff is rated for,
and I don't have the ground clearance,
1,000-something pounds plus of pulling. So you see I've got the beaner, put it through, then I've got a little loop I had created.
You can guarantee you don't care.
I clipped the beaner in, so now we don't have to tie any knots. And there's a loop on the other end too, which makes it a little easier to hold on to because it's a bit slippery. And all you really got to do, you don't have to go crazy, especially if you weigh 200 plus pounds.
Okay.
All you do is lean back.
Hold it, it's stuck on your fender.
And
okay, go.
It makes an incredible difference to have one person pulling on this rope as opposed to everybody trying to pull on the bike or push on the bike. Because you can usually get away from the mud and the obstacles and get some solid footing. So what you're putting into pulling that bike is a lot more than a guy standing on a hill in the mud trying to push on the fender. We were all working up a pretty good sweat, so here you can see I've taken my jacket off and now my helmet's on the ground, and we are going to try and get Joe's cross challenge through our little obstacle. Joe figured he wasn't going to have much success trying to get up this incline, so instead of getting stuck halfway up, he decided to just wait at the bottom and we would rope up there and just pull right from the get-go. With Chris and Joe operating the bike. And what's funny here is Chris is running the gas, Joe is running the clutch. So I think part of the problem here is that there's a little issue with coordinating it. Now Chris is operating all the controls, and with me pulling on the rope, didn't take us too long to get the X challenge up and out of the ditch. The F800GS is the porkiest member of our little band. So we knew that it was going to be the one that was going to require the most effort. One of the things we figured out is that it's easiest just to put the rope around both fork tubes. You can still steer the bike, and it works better than clipping onto one side or the other onto the crash bars, where you're trying, your force is kind of being applied unevenly. So we've got the douche rope looped around both forks, and on the pulling end this time it's going to be Chris, and on the pulling end this time it's going to be Joe, and Chris and I are going to try and manhandle the 800 up the hill. Chris scooted the butt over so it would line up with our logs. And up we went. And it went really well until I lost my footing and fell down the embankment. The three of us made pretty easy work of getting the 800 back up on its wheels. I imagine if you were doing this alone, this would have been a pretty interesting moment. My GoPro battery died and I didn't notice, so now you're watching through Joe's camera. And after the little obstacle, the road continued with that same kind of hard-packed, sandy construction, which is actually quite nice. It's got a lot of traction, and it tends to be pretty consistent. But after seeing that washout, which wasn't super well marked, I mean, I guess if you'd been screaming down that road at 100 kilometers an hour, you could have come up on that washout pretty quick, and it might have been a little more exciting than most people would have liked. And we were still seeing spots on the left and right here where part of the road had caved in, and there were some of those erosion grooves. So even though we weren't expecting a lot of traffic with the washed out bridge behind us, we certainly weren't going crazy here with speed. A little further along, we came upon a sign indicating there was a steep, long hill climb. Here you can see Joe. He's taking it pretty slow. He's probably bordering on going even a little too slow, because this is quite steep, and if you spin it when you're going that slow and you don't have any momentum, you could come to a stop. And then getting going again could be a bit of a pain. But the cross challenge made it to the top. Here you can see it's changed from being a road to more what I would call a trail. Because, yes, you could drive a Honda Civic down this, but you would have to proceed pretty carefully. You could certainly drive a Ford Focus wagon down this if you were of the mind to do so. You can see the tire tracks here from Chris and I. And one of the things I like to do when I'm riding in the back like this is when you do come to an obstacle, a puddle, or as we see here coming up, another one of these hill climbs, it's kind of fun to see where the other guy went, what his decision-making process was. And often you'll end up following his tire track, but a lot of the times you kind of go your own way, and you start to realize that everybody has their own style of where they like to go. And I guess some of it's bike dependent. You know, on the bigger bikes, a lot of the times, if there's a groove or something, you might be better off just to get in and stay in that groove instead of trying to skirt along the edge of it and falling down into that groove. This little climb here was a little bit rocky and loose. And Joe had not quite enough speed, but he gets it going again. And that's a case too where the X Challenge, being a lot lighter than the HP2 and way lighter than the F800GS, plus he's got very aggressive tires on it, he was able, even on that incline, to just get started once again. When you go up, you must come down, and here we can see the other side of that hill. And I actually find the downhills more challenging, and we probably fall more often going down than we do going up. If you're going up and you kind of run out of steam and you come to a stop, not the end of the world. It's on the downhills where if at some point you just start gaining too much speed and you go down, you tend to go down going a little faster than you would if you just sputtered to a stop on a climb. And Joe here has decided to pretty much go down this at a walking pace. One other thing I find odd is when you do that, where you're on a downhill and you decide, I'm just going to not let the bike gain any momentum and I'm basically just going to walk it down, is that it's incredibly tiring. You would think just walking the bike down on the brakes, but because the bike isn't keeping itself up, you're the one manhandling the entire weight of that bike, keeping it from falling over. While when it's moving, as long as it's got just enough speed to stand upright, it takes a lot less energy to get that bike to the bottom of the hill. Joe was a little rusty. He'd only picked up this bike at the end of last season when he bought it from Cousin Charles. So one of the things we also try to keep in mind is whether it's with one of our members who hasn't been riding for a while for whatever reason, or if it's someone who's not quite as experienced is, that you have to take that into account. Because if you've got guys in a group who are leading and they're always getting ahead, it's great for them because they can get ahead and stop and drink some water and eat a snack, and you're all waiting for the slow guy to catch up. And then what happens? As soon as the slow guy catches up, all the other guys throw their gear on and speed off, and the slow guy keeps going. So you have the guy who's probably putting out the most energy, who's perhaps working a little harder than the guys in the front of the pack, and he's the only guy who's not getting a chance to catch his breath. Which is why a lot of the time it's a good idea to put that guy in front so that he can determine his own pace and stop when he gets tired.
Middle?
After we'd all had a bit of a break, we got going once again, and I'd thrown some fresh batteries in my GoPro. We decided to let Joe lead on this leg. And this trail had also started to get a little more interesting. There was some long, wet spots, as well as some rockier climbs.
Better give her, Bill!
Joe was spending quite a bit of time looking at this hill climb, formulating a plan, and then he decided to try and avoid all the mess by sticking to the right. Stalled it. I decided to just go right up the middle, and you can hear I'm using a lot of clutch here. The clutch is probably never out on this whole hill climb, and then I stalled it. Now I was just hoping I could get going again without having to have someone help me or turn around and go back to the bottom. And with a lot of slipping, I got going, and then finally I got enough speed where I could transition to standing up again.
Give her a little clutch.
Joe on the X Challenge waited till we had gone by.
He took a bad line.
And then he started trying to get the X Challenge up that hill. You can hear he's trying to get started without spinning it up.
Coming.
Doesn't take much. You can have just a little rock, a little bump in front of that front tire, and you'll try to get that power to the ground, and that rear tire will spin, and you're better off rolling down the hill to reposition. In this case, Chris came to the rescue. The X Challenge is a tall bike, and Joe doesn't have the longest legs, so he's on his tippy toes. But with a little shove from Chris and some feathering of the clutch, he got it to the top of the hill. I started down the other side, and it didn't look too bad. It was steep. There was some loose stuff. And I could see up ahead there was this big rock on the right. And I thought, a big rock, that'll be solid. But when I tried to drive up it, my front end washed out, and down the 800 went. And you can see that's a pretty decent downhill.
Yep.
Kind of knocked the wind out of myself a little bit.
Ankle. Doesn't feel broken. I just tweaked it good. And that's going better.
At this point, I noticed my foot was a little tender.
I'll never play the piano again. At least there was a big rock here. I think the bike just kind of fell on it. But
This is one of those situations where if you'd been wearing what I would call an adventure boot or a dual sport boot, you probably would have really hurt your foot. We've all given up on anything other than a full motocross boot.
can't walk, I got a ride.
I think Joe was wearing something a little less than that, but the rest of us have had enough situations where if you're not wearing the real deal on your feet, they're going to get hurt. Yes, they're not great for walking in, but certainly the amount of walking we would do on one of these rides, it works out fine. And I'd rather pack a pair of shoes, flip-flops, something else, so that if we do have to do some walking, I'll just take them off. Because it's really the lower leg foot that takes a beating on these rides. This was turning out to be a really nice trail. And as usual, it's a beautiful day. We're out on this trail, which is obviously maintained and used regularly enough that it's not all overgrown. And we don't meet anyone. It always amazes me that we can go on these rides and sometimes in an entire day we might see no one out here. A big day might be to see 2 or 3 groups of ATVs. We very rarely see other motorcycles. Sometimes we'll see the tire tracks, so we'll do a little bit of tracking there, and sometimes we can see that 1 or 2 bikes might have been through relatively recently because it would have been washed away by any rain. But we don't meet a lot of folks out here. I guess part of that is that we go early. I imagine maybe on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, if we were out here at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, we might see a little more traffic, but we usually try to get out here early so that we can get home and not use up all of our marital points by disappearing for the entire weekend. Chris pulled up beside me, and it turns out his acro pipe was coming apart where the connecting tube welded to the canister had cracked. So it was still holding together, but I think that was another thing Chris was going to add to his lengthening list of repairs on the mighty HP2. As we rolled along, our trail turned from a trail into a kind of country road, and after that into a well-groomed gravel road. We came across some people walking on the shoulder and slowed way down and waved, and even if they don't wave back, we try to be nice to the people that we meet on the trail, because we know a lot of them are very sensitive to the noise that motorcycles and ATVs and snowmobiles are making. So we try to make a good impression, because I'm sure there's enough people out here making bad impressions. And before long, we were back on asphalt. We stopped for a nutritious and entirely organic, GMO, gluten-free lunch, which I think consisted of French fries, cheese, gravy, and beer. And then we headed home. Even though we hadn't had a plan, the day had turned out quite well. On the ride home, there was a surprising amount of traffic for a Sunday. Once again, thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, whether it's about our bikes, our gear, our poor riding, don't be shy. Leave a comment here on YouTube or head over to our Facebook page. If you search for Awesome Players on Facebook, we're very easy to find. Or you can head over to awesomeplayers.com, and there you can find our contact information if you'd like to send us an email. And you can also now, thanks to Joe, who's our de facto webmaster, if you'd like to buy some of our stickers, there's now an order tab there where you can use PayPal and all that to order a sticker. And with that, I guess we can end another small adventure of the Awesome Players Off-Road Motorcycle Club.